Joining us now from the European Parliament in Strasbourg is the Conservative MEP Daniel Hannan. Daniel Hannan, welcome back to the Daily Politics. Am I right in thinking that this bailout, if that's what we're calling it, is essentially likely to come down to the Germans having to give some kind of guarantees over Greek debt?
I think that's a very good way of putting it. And if I were a German taxpayer, I'd be feeling pretty sore about it. What they're now discovering is that the euro means that they are required to come to the rescue of governments that have been more profligate than their own. By the way, if I were Greek, I'd be even angrier because I've been deprived of the one thing that a country ought to do in this situation, which is a short-term devaluation so as to price themselves back into the market.
What will now stop the markets putting pressure on the debt of other countries, countries that have also racked up huge amounts of debt, such as Portugal, Spain, Ireland, Italy, maybe eventually Britain as well, and that the Germans will have to step in and guarantee all that debt as well?
Well, it'll be interesting to see how that pans out. I mean, the calculation is that the bailout will sting the speculators, if you like, and will reassure the euro, will put the Eurozone on a firm footing. There's quite a lot of evidence that that doesn't always work. You know, the markets are a lot more powerful than governments in the long run.
Presumably...
I wouldn't add Britain, though, to the list, Andrew. Sorry, just to make that point.
Sure.
You said Portugal, Spain. We are in a much happier situation because we kept the pound. The pound did exactly what currencies are meant to do in this situation. It allowed us to suffer a devaluation in our monetary policy instead of suffering it in output and in jobs. OK, though it's also become expensive to insure British debt now because of uncertainty. But let me stick with the Eurozone problem at the moment. Does this now mean that Brussels will, in effect, have to take control of the Greek economy? Because the German taxpayer, I assume, will be unhappy about this, but insist on really tough conditions. Now, the Greeks are already balking at what's been in store. Brussels will now insist on more. Absolutely. And I think this aspect of the crisis is one that has been largely missed so far. The European Union is not simply saying to the Greek government, here is your maximum permitted deficit level, now over to you as to how you get there. The EU has activated a new article given to it under the Lisbon Treaty, Article 121, which empowers it to assume control, effectively, of the Greek economy. And I mean literally assume control of the Greek economy on everything from pensions to healthcare policy. So in a funny kind of way, the people who opposed the euro, and many of those who supported the euro, and who argued that monetary union would mean fiscal union, are now being proved right. It's not possible to keep a currency alive over a whole continent unless there is also an element of common tax and spending.
We've got Howard Davis here from the LSE. I want to bring in a moment. But before I do, Daniel Hannan, let me ask you this. Why don't we just let Greece default? Greece has racked up huge debt it couldn't afford. It has spent money it doesn't have. Not paying taxes is a way of life in Greece. Why don't we just let them default? It's their problem.
It is their problem, but look, it's our problem to some extent too. A lot of Greek sovereign debt is owed to city institutions.
Do you know that for sure? Do you know that for sure, Daniel Hannan? Because I've tried to find out where the liabilities are on this Greek debt, and it's very hard to know where they are.
Sure, and even if that were true, that's not an argument for a bailout, okay? I mean, we bailed out the banks already to rescue them from the errors of their mistakes. If they've invested poorly, that is not the problem of the British taxpayers. But look, I don't take any pleasure in the suffering of a friendly people in an allied country. One of the reasons why the Greeks are in this mess is because they were in the euro, and the markets therefore didn't step in and impose their own corrective 2 or 3 years ago, because there was this myth that Greek debt and German debt were interchangeable. So the Greek people are paying a very high price in order to keep the euro alive. Now, it's not really our problem. I mean, we can take the... we have the luxury of saying we don't mind if there's a bailout. Unfortunately, the French and the Germans have made it their problem because they've surrendered their currencies too.
Howard Davis, is this the beginning of the end of this Eurozone crisis? Because the Germans in particular are going to step in and bail Greece out in various ways? Or is this just the start of a potentially bigger crisis?
I think I'm closer to the latter than to the former, because I think what we're now seeing is a realization that the price paid for putting a floor under the recession has been very high, and that's been paid by all governments. It's been paid by our own. I don't quite understand Daniel Hannan's point about how we've had a devaluation rather than a loss of output in jobs. I think he may have been away out of the country too long, because actually we've had rather a serious recession here, just as they've had in the Eurozone. So that devaluation hasn't actually protected us in that way. But I think the markets are now starting to see that the consequences of all of this government intervention is huge debt, and they're now looking at how those are going to be paid off. And of course the worry that people have is that they'll be paid off in part by inflation. And that's causing investors nervousness, not just about Greece, but other places too.
Very briefly, Daniel Hannan, because we are running out of time. In your view, is this the end of the crisis, or is the Eurozone heading for a bigger crisis now?
First of all, we suffered a very small loss of exports. Germany suffered, 10 times as
all right,
big
I understand you disagree.
But no, is it the end of the crisis? Is it look, because the euro is not an optimal currency area, there are always going to be problems with countries having inappropriate interest rates applied to their conditions. And I'm afraid that problem isn't going to go away unless you have a European superstate with a common fiscal and welfare mechanism to transfer taxation and move money around.
Daniel Hannan, thanks for joining us from Strasbourg.